So it's the 23rd round of special representatives talks on the India-China boundary issue, and these talks were held in Beijing. This was the first meeting of the special representatives since the Galwan standoff of 2020 and the tension along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. Now, both India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and the Chinese Special Representative Wang Yi positively affirmed the implementation of the latest disengagement of the October 2024, resulting in the patrolling and grazing in relevant areas, according to the statement that's been released after the meeting. There was talk on cross-border cooperation and exchanges, including the resumption of the Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra, data sharing on trans-border rivers and border trade. India and China have both underlined the importance of maintaining peace and tranquility in the border areas to promote overall development of India-China bilateral relationship. A significant point in the Indian statement is the emphasis on the need to ensure peaceful conditions on ground so that the issues on the border do not hold back the normal development of bilateral relations. Drawing on the learnings from the events of 2020, India and China discussed various measures to maintain peace and tranquility on the borders and advance effective border management. So what is it that India is seeking? Stable, predictable and amicable India-China relations for regional and global peace and prosperity. Now, this was India's emphasis. But what does this effectively mean for India-China relations on ground? Joining me on India First is Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan. General Narasimhan speaks the Chinese Mandarin language, reads the Chinese minds, has commanded a corps in the East and is a part of the National Security Advisory Board. He studies China very closely. General, as always, welcome on India Today. Also with me is Professor Brahma Chelani, again someone who keeps a hawk eye on China, former advisor to the National Security Council, and Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, former top diplomat, again somebody who studies India-China relations very closely. So we have three domain experts to decode what the statement means. General Narasimhan, what is the biggest takeaway from this statement for you? It confirms disengagement, that's complete, and that patrolling has resumed, as is grazing at the tactical level. But is there a bigger takeaway for you, sir?
I have, thank you very much, Gaurav. It's nice to see you, at least on the TV, if not in person. Thanks for calling me over for this event. There are three common points which come up in the India as well as the Chinese statement that have been put out. One is the fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable kind of a solution for the border issue, border boundary question. This has been mentioned by both the sides. However, Indian side has mentioned it twice in the 5-6 point that they have mentioned. So fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable is something that is going to be important in this particular statements. Second, of course, you have mentioned Mansarovar Yatra is likely to commence. The river data sharing can commence, as well as the border trade in Nathula is something which has been agreed upon. The other thing, third thing, also you mentioned maintenance of peace and tranquility. That is the prerequisite for the boundary talks to continue and to make some kind of a progress. The difference in the statement is something that comes up on two issues. One, in the Chinese statement, there is a mention about a package solution.
Yes.
Now, this package solution is something which was there earlier, but thereafter it was left out. Now it has come up again. It is initial stages. We don't know actually exactly what was discussed. We'll have to wait for the details to come out. But this is one interesting word in the Chinese statement that I noticed. Chinese statement also has drawn the attention to 2005 agreement that was signed as part of the first step towards the three-step process of resolution the boundary question, which implies that there is some kind of an agreement and the progress that is being talked about. And this package solution is something that we need to be looking into it much more carefully. Indian side, of course, has mentioned this fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable kind of a solution to the boundary question. That is, again, more important. These are, I thought, were the takeaways from this two statements.
You know, I'll come to that package solution in just a moment, because Professor Brahma Chelani, that is something which is extremely interesting, mentioned on the Chinese side, not on the Indian side. Professor Chelani, India has repeatedly emphasized peace and tranquility at the borders. That's a must for the relationship to grow. But does the Chinese readout indicate China wants to focus on closer economic ties despite border tensions? And what do you make of this word package solution?
Well, the Chinese statement is packaged in a way that is typically Chinese. They come up with catchy slogans, so now they have a 6-point consensus slogan. But in reality, what they have stated in their statement is nothing new. The package solution bit has evolved over the years. It was first mentioned by Deng Xiaoping when the then Foreign Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee met Deng Xiaoping. And since then, this concept of package solution has evolved, and in fact, in Beijing, it has been interpreted differently. Okay. What Deng Xiaoping originally proposed and what Beijing scholars now talk about, or Beijing officials talk about, is quite different. But I think the most important thing missing from the two statements is the issue of the massing of troops along the border.
Yes.
Indian soldiers forward deployed against China are going through their 5th brutal Himalayan winter. They are up to 1.2 lakh PLA troops, combat-ready troops with heavy weaponry that remain deployed along the India frontier from the western sector to the eastern sector. How can they be normalcy when there is massing of troops? De-induction has to be accomplished, and there is no mention at all in either statement about this critical issue. What is mentioned is about a fair border solution. But Gaurav, we should not forget that negotiations to resolve the border dispute have been going on for many decades. They began when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister.
Absolutely, sir.
Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister in the early 1980s. The talks began as senior level talks. Then in 1987, the name was changed to Joint Working Group. Nothing really changed, but just became a joint working group. Then in 2003, again, nothing changed, only the nomenclature changed, became special representatives. The special representatives have been at it for 21 years.
Yes.
And they have little to show. So, all this hype about this being something new, something promising, misses the point that the present border crisis has arisen essentially because China violated each and every border agreement it signed with India. And there have been a series of border agreements that India and China have signed starting from 1993. Every agreement was violated by them. And for example, resumption of Indian pilgrims tours to Kailash-Mansarovar, or resumption of hydrological data sharing on rivers. Who suspended all that? China.
Yeah.
China suspends things at its own sweet will, and then where it wants, it resumes them.
And that is why India wants the relationship to be predictable. The relationship is anything but predictable. But let's take this, step by step, Ambassador Sajanhar. The first meeting after 2019, more important, the first meeting post Galwan 2020. According to you, what's the biggest takeaway, if at all, from the 23rd round of the special representative talks?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gaurav, for having me. There are a couple of positives and a couple of, ideas that don't find mention. First, in terms of positives, I think the fact that the meeting took place, between the two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping there, and it was decided that we are going to have the special representative talks. We are going to sort of reinstate that. We are going to have meetings between the foreign secretaries of the two countries. We are going to start meetings between the foreign ministers. So this is the beginning of a process.
Okay.
So first thing I would like to see here is that the process has commenced. Now, in terms of outcomes, I think there is very little to show. I agree with the previous two speakers, what is mentioned, that this whole SR exercise has been going on for the last 21 years. And we have very little to show on the ground. It is supposed to resolve the border issue, the boundary problem. Has it been able to contribute in any significant way? So I would have imagined that there would be, we are going back on what was already there, fully well knowing that it has not really yielded the desired results.
And is
But
that
yet, meaning I would like to say that this is a format on which a conversation is taking place. I think the biggest problem here is, in my view, the trust deficit between the two countries. Why China came in 2020 and did what it did, it has not been able to explain so far.
absolutely? So the trust deficit is because of China. All the violations have happened because of China.
Absolutely.
And yet when we move forward, General Narasimhan, the Indian statement talks of emphasis on peaceful conditions on the borders and lessons from the events of 2020. The need for effective border management. What are new CBMs or confidence building measures that need to be put in place, considering that nothing worked, whatever happened in 1993, 1996, 2005, 2013 BDSA, and yet, Galwan 2020 happens, sir?
You see, it is very simple. I fully agree with my panelists here on the show. One is about the troops along the border. I'll come to your question in 30 seconds.
Sir.
Troops along the border, as we have agreed that this is the only first step that has been completed. I agree with Professor Brahmachalani. The other two steps of de-escalation and de-induction are to be negotiated now. That is something that we need to be doing. That is on the higher level military commanders talk that is going to take place on those subsequently. Second is on the trust deficit, which Ambassador Sajjanhar mentioned. That I agree that the trust deficit has been created by 2020. And that brings me to your question. The issue is this: you can agree on any number of CBMs, you can sign any number of agreements, but unless both the sides follow that, if one side decides not to follow it, all these agreements and all the standard operating procedures that we have on the border, they all become useless. So instead of introducing new CBMs, my suggestion would be to tighten the CBMs that we already have and ensure that such lapses do not occur. Because one more CBM won't help you, because if 5 of them before this hasn't helped, I don't think next one is going to help you if both the sides don't follow it. So to my way of thinking, this is a good first step that has happened, but this is only the first step. There are many more steps that we need to come across.
Okay.
One, of course, the troops, the induction, etc. The other thing is to make progress on the boundary discussions. Like both the panelists said, it is 21 years since the SR talk started. And it is still in the second stage. The first stage was the 2005 agreement. Now it is still in the second stage. So this is where I think we need to make a progress. And that is where the main point I mentioned to you about the package solution finds importance in the Chinese statement. And that is where I think we need to have more clarification coming out in the coming days.
In fact, Professor Chelani, how would you look at this talk of resumption of the Kailash-Mansarovar Yatra, data sharing on trans-border rivers and border trade? As you rightly pointed out, all stopped by the Chinese, given the tension that arose. And will there be resumption, or there's just talk that we'll talk about resuming these three?
Well, first, look at the river issue. India provides hydrological data to Pakistan and Bangladesh on a real-time basis, free of cost. But India has to buy hydrological data from China, and the purchase of hydrological data is based on bilateral agreements. And yet, this is not the first time. Even in May 2017, before the Doklam crisis arose, just after India decided to boycott the inaugural summit of the Belt and Road Initiative, China unilaterally, arbitrarily terminated the sharing of hydrological data with India. As a result, these monsoonal floods that occurred in Assam caught India unawares, and there were these preventable deaths. These preventable deaths, they were preventable because when you don't have upstream hydrological data, you're not prepared to respond to such an emergency. So these deaths were preventable. Now, again, at its own sweet will, today China is willing to share, or rather sell, hydrological data to India. But there's one other issue. I won't even go into the past. Right under Prime Minister Modi, you can see the roller coaster ride that India has been through in relation to China. It began with Sabarmati waterfront meeting with Xi Jinping, followed by Doklam crisis and the capture of Doklam almost entirely by China. Then came the Wuhan spirit, the Chennai Connect. That was followed by India being taken by surprise by the Chinese encroachments of April 2020. And now then we had the Kazan meeting between Xi Jinping and Modi, and now the latest statement. Now this is quite a roller coaster ride, in terms of what India has been through.
Absolutely.
And the main thing that Indian Army Chief has said, and even the senior officials have said, India wants a return to status quo ante. But how can there be status quo ante when there are buffer zones and no patrolling areas which have been established largely on Indian territory in eastern Ladakh? Without removal of these buffer zones and no patrolling areas, and China pulling back.
I'll come to General Narasimhan to respond to that in just a moment, because even I've been seeking a solution to this, but the limited time that I have on this part of the show, Ambassador Sajjanhar, as Professor Chilani rightly pointed out, India seeks a stable, predictable and amicable relationship with China. The relationship has been anything but stable, predictable and amicable despite all the efforts made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whether it was Sabarmati or Mamallapuram or Wuhan. Where is the response from China?
Yeah, I think the ball, as we've been talking, as all the other two panelists have also been saying, I think the ball is squarely in China's court. And, all the aggressive actions, all the offensive actions that have been taken, they have been taken by China. And I think it is for China really to demonstrate its good intent, its good will. And we have really not seen any of that so far. So, what I would imagine is, what has happened, what has transpired over the last 4.5 years is that the relations have been very strained, and we have really, not been talking to each other at any, of course, the ministers have been meeting on sidelines of different international sessions. But I think there has to be a process to set the normalization. These steps that are being taken, I think these are baby steps, but it'll have to be, as far as India is concerned, like once bitten, twice shy. You have to walk very, very carefully, but move towards...
Bitten many times by China, and generally it appears that they're seeking access to the Indian market, and the Chinese statement seems to indicate that look at the bigger picture, look at the overall picture. That's how you move forward in the relationship. Don't just focus on the border. So China once again appearing to wanting to lead us up the garden path. India says we are seeking vitality into the framework for settlement of boundary question. Explain the meaning of SRs reiterating the importance of maintaining political perspective of the overall bilateral relationship while seeking a fair, reasonable and mutually acceptable framework, sir.
You see, the Chinese have been saying this for the last 4.5 years. Now the boundary issue, we need to keep it in the right place and progress the bilateral relationship forward. We have been saying, sorry, that is not going to be the case. The status of the boundary will determine the status of the bilateral relationship. That has been the stance in the last 4.5 years. And that stands even today. I don't think there has been a change in the thing. I do agree with Professor Brahmacharani to the extent that there were a lot of efforts made. Like, for example, the kind of meeting that took place between Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping and the Wuhan talk, the informal summit and the Chennai Connect. All those were in the process of actually improving that relationship. But everything went totally awry the moment 2020 happened. So this is something that we need to set right. Okay. That is where the trust comes up, trust building comes up. On the buffer zone issue, it is never meant to be a buffer zone. I think everybody has started mentioning it as a buffer zone. It is supposed to be a temporary moratorium on petroleum by both the sides. And that is going to be the one which is going to come up for talks again between the higher military level commanders. And so it is not a given up issue that buffer zones are there and will continue to remain there. It's not so. It is a temporary moratorium on petroleum, and that will get negotiated in the next zone. So my point is, the short point is this: we want stability, we want peace and tranquility along the border. We want to ensure we go to the process of de-escalation and de-induction, and then the rest of the things can start. Please don't forget the press note 3 is still active.
Okay. We'll continue to debate this and discuss this in the days ahead. I've run out of time on this part of the show. Gentlemen, as always, many thanks for joining me here on India Today.